Sego, and welcome to Let's Talk. I'm John Kane with Johnny Rice, and we've got a great program for you here today. I've got our guest, Dina Gilio-Whitaker, joining us. But before we get into that, and I formally introduce her, let me remind people that we are in fund drive mode. This is our final show during this summer fund drive, so I ask you to go to the pledge lines and make a contribution to Let's Talk and to WBAI. The pledge line number is 516-620-3602. That's the number to call. 516-620-3602. You can go online as well. You can go to our regular WBAI website, which is WBAI.org, and follow the tab for donations. Or you can go to Give To, that's www.give2WBAI.org, and make your contribution that way. You can follow steps to text a donation. I'd encourage you to become a WBAI buddy, which is a sustaining member. You offer your credit card or your checking account information and make a small donation each month or a large donation each month to the station. And that's what sustains us. So if you enjoy the program that we do, and it's like Reggie said, the best way to tell the powers that be that you enjoy this program is to make a contribution in the name of this program. So become a WBAI buddy, make a donation of any size, and support the program, support the station. All right, let me get right back into it. Excuse me. All right, so my guest is Dina Gilio-Whitaker. She is from the Colville Indian Reservation in Washington, and she is an author. Two books that you can, in fact, one of them we've offered here as a premium here on WBAI, which is All the Real Indians Died Off and 20 Other Myths About Native Americans. She co-authored that with our good friend Roxanne Dunbar-Ortiz. And her latest work, which is As Long as Grass Grows, the Indigenous Fight for Environmental Justice from Colonization to Standing Rock. So that's why we opened up with Murray Porter's song about water. I wanted to attribute that book as well. Dina is the Policy Director and Research Associate for the Center for World Indigenous Studies, and she teaches American Indian Studies at California State University in San Marcos and other places. And we'll get into that a little bit. So again, I want to welcome back to Let's Talk Dina Gilio-Whitaker. Thanks, Dina, for agreeing to appear with us on such short notice.
Yeah. Hey, John. Good to talk to you again.
Well, of course, there's always something that plays out in the media or in the world that to me requires some sort of response. And I know that I saw a post of yours where a subject you were teaching about, I think related to scalping, took on a conversation after this last round of mass shootings that took place. And I wanted to reach out to you because one of the things that perhaps most people aren't familiar with, because they either didn't get a chance to see any of the El Paso shooter's manifesto, his racist diatribe, but he mentions Native people. And in fact, I'll actually read the section. He says, "Some people will think this statement," this is a manifesto now, "is hypocritical because of the nearly complete ethnic and cultural destruction brought to Native Americans by our European ancestors. But this just reinforces my point. The natives didn't take the invasion of Europeans seriously. Now what's left is just a shadow of what was. My motives for this attack are not personal." Well, anyway. So the fact that he cited the American genocide, what his ancestors did to an indigenous population, as justification for what he continues to want to do to an indigenous population is absurd all by itself. But I felt like we need to address this and maybe even have a longer conversation about, again, a Native perspective on racism, white supremacy, which I actually reduce white supremacy more to white fragility and fear than anything. And of course, these mass shootings, the relationship between white supremacists, white Americans, and guns, and all of that. So I don't know if you want to open up with any kind of statement on either those circumstances or what kind of precipitated your conversation with some of your students.
Yeah, I will. I mean, so I guess the first thing to say is that, I mean, the whole thing, his addressing that and opening his manifesto like that was insane for a whole lot of different reasons, not the least of which is the fact that he's just plain wrong.
Yeah.
Saying that Native people did not take, the genocide seriously shows his ignorance about history, and the fact that we have 500 years of a history of resistance on this continent, and the reason that the resistance still continues, and he's obviously completely blind to that, and that he just doesn't, but we're not used to hearing our history told this way, right? And in
framed by somebody
narrative,
like that, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, we're not used to hearing that, especially when we look at statistics like the fact that the way Native American history is taught at the K through 12 level is overwhelmingly presented in a pre-1900 context. So when you teach from that perspective, which is totally erasive of Native people as they are now, as modern existing people with growing populations, like rebounding from those 400 years of population annihilation, then that's the perpetuation of that problem. Of course, that guy thinks that because that's all he knows. That's all he's been educated.
Right.
But it shows his ignorance. But to your last question about why this came up at this particular time for me and why I wrote that post on Facebook, which is still going, by the way, is that I was in while those shootings happened, and I was, so they all happened within a span of a week. I happened to be in Boston. I live in Southern California, but I was in Boston participating in some teaching institutes, 3 of them, and one of them was a 6-day-long one where it's by an organization called the Upstander Academy, who put out the film Dawnland. Some of your readers or your listeners might be familiar with that because it's been making the rounds very widely for the past couple of years. But the Upstander Academy is a professional development program for teachers, for K through 12 teachers, that teaches the Dawnland material, but not just the Dawnland material, but the wider history of genocide and how to incorporate genocide, the American genocide, into middle and high school curriculum. So this is a major, major intervention for teachers and how to reframe these historical narratives that are so sanitized, right? We don't like to make kids uncomfortable, even though we have this horrible, horrible history. But it's not telling this horrible history that keeps people so ignorant, like that guy in his manifesto.
Right.
So we were the reason that we're talking about these scalp proclamations. It's not so much about scalping as it is about the history of what we call scalp proclamations and bounty proclamations. And there's not a lot that's been done or historical records that have been written, but the research is being done now by Upstander Academy researchers, and what it is it's showing. So these scalp and bounty proclamations begin in the 1630s, and they start in the Dutch colonies up in northern New England, and then they get adopted by the Plymouth people and the growing populations of colonists in southern New England. And we don't know, possibly even in Jamestown. We haven't done that research yet, but what we do know is that these scalp proclamations and bounty proclamations are official orders, official legal documents that that provide the opportunity for killing Indians and getting paid for it. So it really represents the institutionalization from the very earliest days of European invasion of this indigenous genocide. So it's not, the narrative that we're used to being told and hearing is that, well, the Europeans came and the Indians died from diseases, and that's what causes this massive depopulation. That's only partly true. There's numerous other processes that happen over the course of 400 years that cause these massive Indian depopulations. And the Scalp Proclamations, these are a major part of it because they represent the actual systemization and institutionalization from the very earliest days of genocide. And it connects to Roxanne. So Roxanne Dunbar-Ortiz, my co-author in the first book, it connects to her most recent book that she wrote, which is called Loaded, A Disarming History of the Second Amendment. And in that book, she connects the dots between the Second Amendment and the founding of the establishing of the Second Amendment to these citizen militias that were formed in the earliest days of the colonies, which begins not as a right to bear arms, but as a mandate, like a command to bear arms. So all the male members of the colonies were required to bear arms, and it's really about the killing of Indians in order to clear land, and then it later also is connected to the slave patrols after the transatlantic slave trade is established.
So, I mean, it's fascinating to think that the Second Amendment, that its origins are tied directly to white men being armed to kill people of color. I mean, and that's not like this tremendous leap to make, because the research that Roxanne has done, and even, again, where your research is connecting to it, it shows this history. And again, we're not talking about war here. We're talking about just the killing of Native people specifically, because those scalp proclamations set different prices for women's scalps and children's scalps and these kinds of things. So when again,
different types of body parts.
Oh yeah. So when you fast forward to some coward going in to fire upon unsuspecting women and children and elderly, there's a direct connection historically, and I guess where I have the biggest problem, and I know you weighed in on this too. When I hear somebody says this is not American, that this is not the America that I know. When you hear a politician, who wants to say that bigotry or kids in cages or any of that stuff isn't American, then what part of history are you reading? Because it is very American. It cuts right to the origins of the colonies and the United States. The fact that you would abuse women, children, elderly, people who are unsuspecting, because the biggest difference between the way Native people perceived the white invaders, if you want to call them that, was that we didn't have the same vicious attitude towards eliminating a population that they did. And I think that's what catches, if there's anything that catches us unsuspecting or not really aware of the ruthlessness and the heinous nature that Europeans were bringing to our shores, it's probably that.
Well, yeah, absolutely. I mean, the whole, framing of Native people as savage is like nothing but really a projection, like a massive kind, and it shows something that I, more and more am present to as I do this work, is that in the country right now, our current political moment with this rising white nationalism. I don't even know if it's a rising white nationalism so much as it is an exposing of it. I think it's always been there, and I think that because of Donald Trump and the campaign that he did, and it's we hear this term that he's emboldening the freer expression of this white nationalism. It's not the creation of it; it's that people feel freer to be out there with it. because it's always been there. And so, but the sort of the upside to it, if there is an upside, it's that we can at least acknowledge it now openly and say, look, we have not, 8 years of a black president did not make us a post-racial state. These problems have always been there; they're still here. And,
well, I would actually say that the 8 years of the Obama presidency made white people even more scared, because I don't associate this with white supremacy as much as I do their fragile nature, their fear that this myth that they created about white supremacy, that the white people were genetically and racially superior, that they know that's not true. I mean, frankly, I think some of our people, the people of color, are still wrestling with are they really better than us? I mean, I think that's sometimes the question that comes into our own territories. But
I mean,
they know
definitely sitting in unconsciousness, and that's why there's such high rates of suicide and things like this, is because you feel like you're living in two bodies of how do we manage and cope with being of color or colonized people with colonizers right there giving you messages systematically, institutionally, that you are less than.
Well, and the systematic part is that, to be clear, is that the systems have supported white privilege even when the scientific data has proven that there is no such thing as white supremacy. So, but now that myth is out there, is busted a little bit, you wonder how, and of course, when you see a population shift, you wonder how scared are these white people? I mean, you don't throw an AR-15 over your shoulder and walk into a Burger King because you're brave.
Yeah. Well, you know what I think? I mean, again, and where I was going with this is that I think that as a country, I think that we are more, as screwed up as things are with our race relations, I think that we are more able to deal with racial tension in this country and more willing to reckon with that than we are with settler colonialism. Like, we can talk about racism, in all these different kinds of ways, but we have a national dialogue about it. What we don't have a national dialogue about is settler colonialism.
Well, and the connection between settler colonialism and racism, because, again, if you only stop at just this idea of skin color, and you don't recognize that what settler colonialism does is an attempt to reshape and reform an entire masses of people, not just, again, when you talk about assimilation policies and the idea of destruction of language and culture and land relationships, all of that stuff, which ties to your current book out there. Our people don't understand that the environmental responsibility that we as indigenous people have is not just a movement. It is something that is ingrained in our culture. Yeah,
and the thing is that the problem, the way settler colonialism starts, it doesn't start as a racial project. It starts as a religious project. So it begins with religious domination and the dehumanization of indigenous peoples based on what was perceived to be an inferior culture. So it becomes racialized later as we start talking about race as a science, and during the early to mid 1800s. But it begins, in a completely different place, and that's what we know now as the doctrine of discovery, or the doctrine of Christian discovery. So, that's something most people don't realize, that this idea of, the superior genius of Europe being rooted in Christianity is what is the foundation of the entire legal system that governs native lands and native lives. And, we can't even have a conversation about that. It's just enacted. It's the mechanism that native people are governed by every single day.
Right.
So, and that's why, I say we are not in this country reckoning with settler colonialism as the first sin. We have this narrative in this country about the first sin the first sin being slavery, right? You hear that often, but it's not. Before we had transatlantic slavery, there was genocide.
Well,
and
and
land
then
theft.
even on the slavery note, I mean, there isn't an automatic assumption that Native people were victims of that slave trade as well.
Right, absolutely, right. I mean, one of the things that we saw when I was in Boston last week teaching was that we went around, because Boston's, got these rich archives, and we went to the Boston Historical Society and saw Palmetto Comet's bowl. So Palmetto Comet, who of course was killed during King Philip's War in 1675, which is the first massive full-scale war that happens on this continent, is still considered the bloodiest conflict of all conflicts, or the most destructive, even more than the Civil War. So we saw Palmetto Comet's bowl. It's a big, beautiful carved wooden bowl that was taken as a trophy, and they wrote inside it in like gold leaf that this is a trophy taken from Palmetto Comet during that war. But so we saw that, it shouldn't be there. It should be with those people, that he came from, the Wampanoag people. But we also saw a couple of documents, the original documents, at the end of the King Philip's War. The people that survived, the Indians that were captured, were sent off to enslaved and sent off to the Caribbean somewhere. And so this is the beginning.
And that's not a history that anybody is taught.
Right. Well, yeah. I mean, it's in my book. I wrote about it, and Andres Resendez did a great job. Although he doesn't focus on the New England history of it, I don't think. But there is a growing literature on the indigenous slave trade.
Well, the interesting thing, I want to ask you specifically because you are West Coast. The other thing that gets lost in this thing is that you're talking about centuries apart. What Native people experienced in New England versus what Native people experienced on the West Coast, under more Spanish rule and that kind of stuff, including the death associated with people like Junipero Serra. But I had recently one of the guys from Seneca Nation suggested that he asked a question when slavery was eliminated in the United States, and when of course the automatic assumption is that it's 1868 or 1865, but the problem is that Native people did not gain any protection under the 14th Amendment. So from what I understood, there were still Native people that were essentially living not as citizens of the United States, which I don't have a problem with that, but we're actually still compelled to servitude in the West Coast right up until the turn of the 20th century. Exactly.
Yeah, it's a very concealed history. But again, it's being written about more and more. I mean, Brendan Lindsay wrote about it in his book called Murder State in 2012, and then I think Madley talked about it in his book American Genocide. And so, but it's been, so yeah, that was happening. I mean, there's these indentured servitudes, and they were, under these, more innocent-sounding phrases like, internships, or there was some other word that they would use. But yeah, I mean, this is long after black people are not allowed to be enslaved anymore legally. It's happening in this more insidious and more concealed way in California. California history, indigenous history, is perhaps the most heinous history of genocide and slavery of anywhere in the country.
Well, and again, you can't, when you consider what took place in the Southwest and in West Coast California, and you realize that one of the other issues ends up being who are like the shooter in El Paso, who he is considering the invaders. And when you consider that the indigenous population that existed in the Southwest were many of the people who are now being victimized by the rhetoric from Donald Trump or the shooters' bullets are really indigenous people. They aren't invaders to a new land. They aren't somebody coming in to threaten. They're people who really are part of what could be historical migratory routes that indigenous people, regardless, just the fact that they happen to speak Spanish or have gone through the genocide and the assimilation of under Spanish rule, doesn't make them not be indigenous people.
Right, and a lot of them coming now are not even Spanish speakers. They're speakers of indigenous languages.
Exactly.
And we're not hearing about that in these mainstream stories. It's all framed within the language of nation states, as though that's all there's ever been, right? I mean, and that opens up to a whole conversation of what is the nation state and this current way that the world is organized, which is fundamentally a colonial construction.
Right.
But it only dates back to 1648 with the Treaty of Westphalia, right, with the beginning of the birth of the modern nation state. So that's only less than 400 years old.
And again, when you consider that now much of the data is suggesting that there's been a population in the Western Hemisphere that's dating back in excess of 100,000 years, busting open all of the previous calculations that
nobody wants to talk about that.
Exactly. So I mean, and when you think about that history and the cultural development and the not just language but societally, how we managed our sustenance. It's really easy for people to say, well, Native people, they were just hunter-gatherers. They lived a life of sustenance. They ignore the fact that we had complicated trade routes. We had complicated systems within our society. We may not have had the hierarchies that Europe was known for, but we certainly had developed a different sense of what was humanity, put it that way.
Well, most of us were farmers.
Right.
I mean, just that alone. I mean, when they got here, those boat people came here from Europe, what they found, even like if you talk about like the Mayflower, and those weren't the first people, by the way. Mm-hmm. They weren't the first people, but when they got here in 1620, and they had come on the heels of what they called the Great Dying, that had just happened, a year or two earlier because of a disease that had wiped
the
out.
European plagues they brought with them. Yes.
Yeah, and so they found, it's documented in their journals that they found, these massive stores of food and the remnants of their farms, and they raided them for because they were starving and they needed food. So these people knew and if Squanto taught them how to farm. I mean, how do you talk about Native people being, nomadic hunters and gatherers when this foundational myth about Thanksgiving is all about Squanto teaching Pilgrims how to farm?
Right.
I mean, it makes no sense.
Well, and this goes all the way down, the coast, even into the Gulf region and that kind of stuff. There's documentation from the Spanish and others about these sophisticated villages that existed, not just dense population centers, but systems of villages and the connectivity and the trade routes.
Right.
So, and of course, none of that is taught.
Like Cahokia.
Yeah, exactly. Well, Dean, I want to thank you so much for joining me, and I'm glad to have you weigh in on. Again, I find it absurd that a coward like this guy who went to El Paso would try to use us as any justification for his deeds. But I appreciate you helping us put some context to it.
All right, thanks, John.
I got Roxanne going to join us by phone next week, so we'll take up where we left off with you.
All right, that sounds great.
Thanks again for joining us.
Take care.
All right.
Bye.
Okay, that's Dina Gilio-Whitaker. Her current book is As Long as Grass Grows, The Indigenous Fight for Environmental Justice colonization to Standing Rock. So I encourage you to take a look at that. And of course, her previous book was co-authored with Roxanne Dunbar Ortiz, which is All the Real Indians Died Off and 20 Other Myths About Native Americans. All right, we're going to go to a break, and we'll come back and we'll take some of your calls. But I do want to remind people we are in fund drive mode, so please do go to the pledge line and dial 516-620-3602. If you're enjoying the show, if you're enjoying the interviews that we've been presenting and some of the top, subject matter that we cover here, even if you don't enjoy it, if it just stimulates your thought process, that's what we do here. We're trying to offer a Native perspective to the issues that affect us all. So if you appreciate what we do here with this show, then go to the pledge line, dial 516-620-3602, make a contribution, become a WBAI buddy, do something to support this program and this station. Thank you. Thanks for coming back. Hey, we are going to go to your phone line, so if you want to join the show or you want to weigh in on some of the comments from myself or Shawnee or from Dina, then go to the phone lines. It's 212-209-2877. That's the number to call to be a part of the show. That's you actually can be on air and give your thoughts. We can have a conversation, a debate, if you will. But you have to call to do so. So call the number 212-209-2877. I want to remind people that we are in fund drive mode. So if you want to support the show, not necessarily with your commentary, but with your dollars, then go to the pledge line. Go to 516-620-3602. That's where you can make a contribution of any size. You can become a buddy, and then you can make a monthly contribution of any size there as well. You can text yeah, there we go. Yeah. you can text a donation. You can go to the website, which is www.give2, that's G-I-V-E, the number 2, WBAI.org, and follow the steps to make a contribution there. All right, so again, I'm open up to a conversation with anybody who would like to join us in the debate that we started with Dina Gilio Whitaker. Again, I want to remind people of her latest book, which is As Long as Grass Grows: The Indigenous Fight for Environmental Justice from Colonization to Standing Rock. And and it all ties in together. And and as I talk about things like white supremacy being a myth, and that that white people don't even believe it anymore, which actually makes white supremacy devolve into what I call white fragility or outright fear. And that's what you hear. I mean, this isn't just arbitrary fear mongering. When you've got Donald Trump or others talking about people seeking asylum as an invading force, like they're being under attack, when they use words like invasion, or some of the other descriptors that they gave to describe women, children who are desperately trying to, improve their life situation. Oftentimes, a life situation that has been altered by the very capitalism and corruption and political processes that the United States supports. That's how we get to where we're at. That's how we get. I mean, we talk about, we hear the media and others refer to these white mass shooters as lone wolves. And if you're a part of the KKK, I don't know how that makes you a lone wolf. If you're a part of an internet platform where you have people supporting you and weighing in and adding to your hostility and your hatred towards people, that's not a lone wolf. That's a community of people that's supporting an ideology, and that gets born out of people from the highest offices of the United States to frankly to church congregations, to social organizations, and frankly the way things are taught in the schools. Are we? I see the phone. We got one online. Okay. All right. We'll go to a caller. Caller, you're up first. What's your name? Where are you calling from?
This is James the Flames from Brooklyn.
Hey, James. Thanks for calling.
Yeah, thank you. We must understand these people, these Caucasian people. They're born to do what they do. They're wicked by nature. You must understand. There's a book out by Francis West Wellesley, and it's called The ISIS Papers. So I'm gonna just say this and cut you loose. We need to study that book that talks about genetic annihilation. And this is what the Caucasian mindset is afraid of. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you for the call. I mean, look, one thing is clear, that line between evil and desperation can get really blurry. And whether white people are at risk of losing their privilege or not, which let's hope they are. But the fact that you've got you got some people that are desperately afraid of that and are acting out that desperation, that's when true evil comes in. All right, we got another caller on the line. Caller, you're up next. What's your name? Where are you calling from?
This is Bill from Hazlitt.
Hey, Bill, how you doing?
Hi, how are you?
I'm fine, thanks.
I mean, it's funny. I know you're not going to like what I say, but you could take what you just said in the last 5 minutes and turn it around, put it right in the mirror in your face, how you're so afraid of the white man and that you're getting a gang together by putting it on the air, and all I hear all the time is white supremacy, KKK, white supremacy, when that's like 1/10 to 1/1000th of a percent.
You think that the Trump supporters are only 1/10 that are white supremacy? Oh man, you're
listen. Hold it.
Because you can't even your own support of Donald Trump is right there on that border edge, on that border line.
Donald Trump and I are juxtaposed. What are you talking about?
You're juxtaposed. Every time you call, you support the same ideology that Trump espouses. Whether you don't like him as an individual, this is about ideological differences, and clearly your ideological opinions are lined up with the right so much, and with white supremacy so much that there's no way of denying it. All right, we can go to another call. This is all right. Anyway.
I mean, I also don't think that we're not afraid here, and we're not bringing a gang to talk against white supremacy. What we are doing is providing a critique
and educating.
Right. And whatever we're saying we're not lumping all white people into saying that they're all parts of KKK or they're all racist, but the parts who are violent and who are killing people, we're discussing, and specifically when that impacts who we are and our existence as a people. And this is, if we're talking about a settler colonialism and how this country is responding to that, we're showing how that is reflected within institutions and systems And that's what we're talking about. So if you're the only thing that you're hearing is white supremacist or KKK that, then A, you're not listening to the whole thing, or B, you're choosing to call and take up space and talk about just what you're hearing.
But that's white fragility. I mean, because you're only hearing the things that scare you, and the idea that anybody could twist anything we said around that we were somehow building a gang of white haters here. I mean, is absurd. We're trying to educate people. The reality is we need white allies that will help expose and be willing to surrender the privilege that was born out of this notion of white supremacy all those years. And that's what we need. I mean, that's the only way you're ever going to have equality. That's the only way you're going to ever have justice of any kind, whether it's criminal justice, environmental justice, or just, equity in terms of lifestyles. Do we have another call on the line? Okay, all right. I saw the phone ring. Okay, but no, I mean, this is again the same kind of same notion or same ideology that people can get consumed with.
And also, like when Dina was talking about how like the first contact has always been with the scalping proclamation has been that if you kill an Indian, there'll be a monetary incentive.
Reward. Yeah, there's a
right.
reward. Yeah.
So again, and to bring this back, the logo that I showed you, the seal of New York City, the shield of the New York police is a colonial man and a native man on both of those official seals. So the first contact is used at the official seal in 2019, and it's supposed to represent peace and a way that we can talk to each other. But what it's actually saying is this is submissiveness and this is colonization. And I was talking with my friend Regan, who had pointed that out to me.
Sure.
And that symbol on that was a mast.
On the one on the corner
one
there,
that
yeah.
was like
I wasn't sure what that was,
but
I wasn't sure was that a sling or it looks like a little noose, but
on the cop shield.
The one that the white guy is holding in his hand, it's a rope with a
that's on the cop shield. I don't know what that one is.
I don't know if that's a sling. I don't know.
It looks like a whip.
Yeah, I'm not sure what it is. All right. Hey, I want to remind people, first off, we probably got time for one more caller, so let me put the number out there. Again, it's 212-209-2877. That's the number to call to be a part of the show. But I also want to remind people, this is our final show in the Summer Fund Drive, so I encourage you to support the program, support WBAI by going to the pledge line. Go to 516-620-3602. Look, here's what I'm going to do. Going forward, every week, I'm going to try as hard as I can to encourage one listener to become a WBA buddy each week, and that way at the end of the year we've got that Let's Talk will have signed up 52 buddies or thereabouts. So again, maybe that one buddy is you this week. So I encourage you to go to the pledge line and sign up to be a WBA buddy, and it can be for $5 a month, it could be for $10 a month, whatever you can swing. And again, 516-620-3602. All right, our final caller of the afternoon. Caller, you're up next. What's your name and where are you calling from?
Hi, I'm just going to keep all that anonymous if that's okay.
Oh, that's fine. That's fine.
Cool. So I heard on the news, I'm trying to find the article to see if I still have it up, that there's been a bunch of police suicides lately. Did you guys hear about that?
No. So there's an uptick in policemen committing suicide?
Here it is. NYPD suicides. USA Today. From USA Today. The article came out. Oh, goodness. Why doesn't it show? When you're looking at it from the phone, it doesn't show you really everything.
Well, but on that subject, though, I don't think when you consider what happens to the mind when people become soldiers, just like when they become police, and they become indoctrinated into a culture of bias and use of force, permission to use force. I think that's the kind of thing that not everybody's going to respond the same. Some people will relish it, and of course those are the dangerous people that'll choke out somebody over cigarettes. And then other people are going to struggle with it, and so I'm not surprised that you see the same thing with veterans, the high suicide rate amongst veterans. You coming up with something, Reggie?
Yeah, I see the New York Times article that says 4 officers' suicides in 3 weeks. NYPD struggles to dispel mental health stigma And that is an article that is from June 27th of this year.
Wait, but I wanted to, what did your articles point out that you read?
Mine was from actually June 15th, and it was 3 police officers killed themselves in 10 days.
Okay.
From NYPD, just NYPD. So.
Well, and I don't. Again, I think there is a mental health issue with anybody who is armed to kill. You create the opportunity for mental health to devolve and to, I mean, whether it's an illicit person, whether it's, nobody ever talks about the mental health of gang violence. They just think that, well, that's just evil. That's not a mental health issue. Anybody. But I have like a great point though that's kind of different from that, because the article speaks for itself. But as more of like a turning of the tides kind of thing, my outlook, if I could share it. Go ahead.
So, like the other day, and it ties into the shootings. The other day, I ran into some of those Israelite folks.
God.
On the street, right? And I'm white, okay. But I realized like a little while ago that there's like 3 different reasons why people become activists. 1, they do it for a resume. 2, they do it for like cred. And 3, sometimes it's in their blood and their family members were activists and they were raised with it, and that was my case. And so I happened to be wearing this white shirt that was like an activist shirt because I was going to do something where I had to be wearing a white shirt. And so it was like I'm wearing my shit on my, wearing my stuff on my feet. And so I go right into the middle of them and I go, look at me. Tell me what a horrible person I am right now. Read my shirt and tell me what a horrible person I am right now, right? So just what I started with. And the guy goes, sister, right? And then right away I started in on like horrible stuff, whatever. So I walked away. But then I realized I was going in the wrong direction because I was so flustered and like I had no idea I was in a new town. And I turned and I went back and I'm like, wait, which one of you just called me? I go, like, the only thing I said before I walked away, I was like, do you guys believe that we're all one human family? And the guy goes, no. And then I walked away. So then I turned around, like, eventually, like, 15 minutes later, and I went back, and I'm like, which one of you called me sister? Right? So maybe they're even coming around, like, their gut is maybe coming around to, like, the thing that you were saying with the allies and stuff like that, right?
I think they're incredibly not intellectual. They can barely read the books that they're talking from. Their outfits are from Party Store. Like I have no patience for them. They set up shop right across from my apartment every year when they have Puerto Rican Day Parade, and they're just dumb. They hate gay people. They compared homosexuality to 2 male pit bulls in a row. Like there's no credibility that I believe that they have. I think that they didn't have any group they belong to, and this is the only one that they feel safe in. And I mean, I don't even think I don't think they're embraced by Israel of any kind. And when they think that, they said that natives are a part of that. I said, okay, name any native nation in New York. They couldn't even name one. So I was like, I don't want to hear anything that they have to say ever from them.
Saying, like me, my hope, my like total dream, like, cotton candy, like best case scenario is that maybe the cops are coming around. Maybe they're coming around.
Yeah. We can always. Look, and that's the reason we outreach in the first place. I mean, the reason we do this show, we're trying to educate people. We're not really trying to alienate people. But if you don't point out, the false narratives that history has been teaching people, then it's like Dina said on the show. You just continue to perpetuate the same myths.
I think COs, correctional officers who go into prison, they're being locked up too. So a certain part of their mental state is deteriorating too. But I will also say, some people have great intentions to be cops or COs. Like they want to go in and make a difference. And then they come with that moral crossroads when they realize what system and what structure that they're participating in doesn't allow them to have that. But at the end of the day, it is also your choice to be a police officer. Right. And you can also leave and find other well-paying jobs as security guards or whatever. Start a nonprofit. Like, you have options.
There are ways to protect
it's
people.
Not like gang life where they're like, oh, well, you can just get out of it. Not the same thing. So I do feel bad that there's an increase in suicide, but there's also a choice.
We're right at a time. I want to thank you for the call, though. You bring up a good point. Again, I want to thank people for listening. Do go to the pledge lines, 516-620-3602 to make a call or make a donation to the show, to the station. I greatly appreciate it. We'll be back next week. We'll have Roxanne Dunbar-Ortiz, although Shawnee won't be with us.
I'll be in Hawaii.
She's going to be in Hawaii. So I'll have Roxanne join us by phone. So we'll see you next week. Thanks for listening. Yahweh.